Millionaire gives a homeless virgin shelter until his ex returns to ruin everything. Hello, my beautiful YouTube family. Welcome to another heart-touching journey filled with love, emotions, and stories that will stay in your heart. Whether you are a new viewer or a loyal supporter who has been with me since the beginning, I want you to know that you are cherished, you are valued, and you are deeply appreciated. May your heart always find love, your soul always find peace, and your life always be filled with blessings beyond measure. I pray that every tear you shed turns into joy, every struggle you face turns into strength, and every dream you hold turns into reality. May love always find its way to you in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. Thank you for being part of this family, for supporting my stories, and for believing in the magic of love. Your comments, likes, and shares mean the world to me, and I am so grateful for each and every one of you. Question for you: what is the most powerful love story you have ever heard or experienced? Share in the comments. I'd love to read your beautiful thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue this journey together. Sending you all love and light. The city was drowning in a relentless downpour, the streets shimmering under the glow of flickering streetlights. Callum Hayes tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his luxury car glided through the nearly deserted roads. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windshield filled the silence, his mind lost in the monotony of his usual routine. Being a billionaire had its perks. He had power, wealth, and influence, but in moments like these, everything felt hollow. The city lights, once dazzling, felt cold and distant, mirroring the emptiness he often ignored. Then he saw her. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a woman stood, her body trembling as the rain soaked through her tattered clothes. Her arms wrapped around herself in a desperate attempt to find warmth, but it was futile. The sight of her was enough to make something inside Callum tighten. He had seen many people struggling in life, but there was something different about her. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, despite the clear suffering she endured. She wasn't just a shadow in the night. She was a presence, captivating and haunting all at once. Her stunning brown eyes held a mix of defiance and vulnerability, emotions clashing like a storm within her gaze. Dark curls clung to her skin, dripping with rain, and her full lips, painted with bold red lipstick, quivered slightly as she shivered. She was breathtaking, even in her current state. Without thinking, Callum pulled over. The expensive tires splashed water onto the pavement as he stepped out, ignoring the rain soaking through his tailored suit. The cold was biting, but he barely noticed. He moved toward her, each step echoing with purpose. She flinched slightly when she saw him approaching. Her body tensed, as though she was ready to run. "Hey," Callum said, his voice deep yet gentle. She eyed him warily, taking in his expensive attire, the sleek car parked behind him, and the aura of power that seemed to radiate from him. She had encountered rich men before. None of them had ever stopped for someone like her. "I don't have any money," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Callum's lips quirked slightly. "I'm not here for money. You look like you need help." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "That obvious, huh?" Callum hesitated for a moment before shrugging off his coat. He stepped closer and draped it over her shoulders. She tensed at first, but then clutched the warm fabric around her. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with the rain, a stark contrast to the damp, cold air she had grown used to. "Come with me," he said firmly. She narrowed her eyes. "Why would I?" He didn't blame her for being skeptical. The world had probably been cruel to her. "Because you're freezing, and I have a warm place for you to stay tonight." Silence stretched between them. She studied him, searching for deception. When she found none, she sighed. Her entire life had been a series of disappointments, people who promised safety only to take advantage of her. But something about Callum made her hesitate. Maybe it was the sincerity in his blue eyes, or the calm confidence in his stance. "I don't even know your name." Callum Hayes. And you, Zariah Munro, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the rain. A name that, unknown to both of them, would soon be etched into the deepest chambers of his heart. Zariah hesitated before nodding, the exhaustion in her body winning over her distrust. Callum led her to his car, opening the door for her like a gentleman, a gesture that surprised her. As she slid into the luxurious interior, she realized that this was the first time in years that someone had shown her kindness. The warmth of the car immediately embraced her, and she let out a shaky breath. It felt unreal, like a dream she'd wake up from at any moment. Callum settled into the driver's seat and glanced at her. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked softly. She hesitated before shaking her head. "No." His jaw tightened. "Then you'll stay with me tonight." Her heart pounded at his words. Was she making a mistake? Could she really trust him? But as exhaustion weighed her down, she made a silent decision for tonight. She would take a chance. Little did she know, this night would change both of their lives forever. The quiet hum of the engine filled the air as Callum's car glided through the darkened streets. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, leaving the city drenched in a glistening sheet. Inside the warmth of the vehicle, Zariah sat silently, clutching the coat he had given her. The scent of his cologne lingered in the fabric, a reminder that this night was unlike any other. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't braving the cold streets alone. She stole a glance at the man beside her. His strong jawline, his piercing blue eyes focused on the road. Everything about him screamed power and control. He was the kind of man who could make or break lives with a single decision. And yet here he was, offering her shelter with no expectations. Or so he claimed. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice hesitant. "My place," Callum replied smoothly. "You'll be safe there." Zariah's fingers curled into the fabric of the coat. The idea of staying in a billionaire's home felt absurd. She had been invisible to the wealthy her whole life, merely another shadow on the streets they ignored. And now one of the richest men in the city was giving her a place to stay. It had to be a dream, or a trick. The car pulled up in front of a towering building made of gleaming glass and steel. It stretched high into the night sky, its windows reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. Callum stepped out first, then walked around to open her door. The gesture caught her off guard. "Come on," he said, extending a hand. Zariah hesitated before accepting it. His palm was warm, strong, a stark contrast to the cold world she had known. They entered through the private lobby, where the doorman greeted Callum with a respectful nod. He didn't even glance at Zariah, as if assuming she belonged. She followed Callum to the elevator, heart pounding with uncertainty. As the doors slid shut, enclosing them in a space of sleek black walls and gold accents, she stole another glance at him. "Are you sure about this?" His gaze met hers, unwavering. Yet the elevator chimed, and the doors opened to reveal a penthouse so breathtaking it stole the air from her lungs. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, casting a mesmerizing glow over the modern luxurious space. Plush furniture, marble floors, and a chandelier that looked like cascading stars. It was another world entirely. Zariah took a hesitant step forward, her worn-out shoes making no sound on the pristine floor. This is your home," Callum smirked. Surprised, she let out a short laugh, filled with disbelief. Surprise doesn't even begin to cover it. He led her down a hallway, stopping at a door. "This will be your room." She turned to him, frowning. "You're just giving me a room?" "Yes, you need a place to stay. That's all." Suspicion flickered in her eyes. "And you don't expect anything in return?" Callum's expression softened. "No, Zariah, I don't." For a moment, she didn't move. She had spent years learning that kindness often came with a price. But something about him, his steady confidence, his lack of hesitation, made her believe he meant it. Finally, she stepped inside. The room was bigger than any place she had ever lived. A king-sized bed, silk sheets, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom that looked more like a spa. Zariah touched the edge of the bed, her fingers sinking into the softness. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. She wasn't used to softness. Callum cleared his throat. "There are fresh clothes in the closet. Take a shower, get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." He hesitated before saying, "Good night, Zariah." As he left, closing the door behind him, Zariah sat on the bed, gripping the silk sheets. It was too much, too perfect, and that terrified her more than the streets ever had. Days passed, and Zariah found herself settling into a rhythm she never imagined. The warmth, the security, the luxury, it was all surreal. At first, she stayed in her room, wary of Callum's intentions, but he never once crossed a line. He didn't treat her like she owed him anything. Gradually, her walls began to crack. She started exploring. The library fascinated her the most. Rows upon rows of books, their spines calling to her curiosity. One evening, she found herself curled up in an armchair, a novel open in her hands, lost in another world. She hadn't had the chance to read in years, and now she couldn't stop. Callum noticed. "You like books," he commented one evening, watching her from the doorway. She glanced up, startled. "I used to. Before." She trailed off. He didn't press. Instead, he smirked. "I'll make sure you have more to read." And he did. The next morning, a stack of new books appeared on the coffee table. No words were exchanged, but Zariah knew it was his doing, and that was the moment she started seeing him differently. She had assumed he was just another rich man with no heart, but he was proving her wrong. He didn't pity her, he saw her, and that was dangerous. One evening, Callum returned from work to find her standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights casting a golden hue around her. But it wasn't just the view that stole his breath. It was her. She had borrowed a sleek black dress from the closet, the fabric hugging her curves like a second skin. Her brown eyes gleamed under the dim light, and her lips, painted in that same signature red, curved into a small, amused smile. "You're staring," she teased. Callum swallowed hard. "You look different." She raised an eyebrow. "Good different or bad different?" His blue eyes darkened slightly. "Very good different." A charged silence stretched between them. For the first time since she arrived, Callum felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. Zariah had become a disruption to his structured world, one he wasn't sure he wanted to fix. And that was the moment he realized he was in trouble. Callum had always been a man of control. Every part of his life was carefully measured, from the way he ran his billion-dollar company to the way he kept people at arm's length. But Zariah Monroe was beginning to challenge every one of his carefully built walls. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or intimidated by his power. Despite everything she had been through, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her strength hidden beneath the layers of struggle and survival. And it was that resilience, that fire in her deep brown eyes, that captivated him more than anything else. He tried to fight it. He told himself that bringing her into his home had been an act of kindness, nothing more. But the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to ignore the attraction simmering between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, they found themselves side by side in his kitchen. Zariah had insisted on cooking for him as a way to thank him for his generosity. She moved with an effortless grace, her curves accentuated by the oversized shirt of his she had borrowed. Callum leaned against the counter, watching her, mesmerized by the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "You keep staring at me like that. I might start charging you," she teased, her lips curling into a playful smirk. Callum chuckled, but the way his heart pounded against his ribs was no laughing matter. He cleared his throat, trying to shake the thoughts running through his mind. "I'm just trying to figure out how someone who was living on the streets a few nights ago can cook better than most five-star chefs." She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Survival skills. You learn a few things when you don't know where your next meal is coming from." His chest tightened at the reminder of her past. He hated the thought of her suffering, of her struggling alone. He had the urge to promise that she would never have to live like that again. But he bit his tongue. knowing that Zariah was not the kind of woman who wanted to be rescued. The air between them shifted. As she stirred the pot, she glanced up at him, her gaze lingering. The tension was undeniable, a current of energy crackling between them. Callum took a slow step forward, his pulse quickening. He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her face. The moment his fingers made contact with her skin, she sucked in a sharp breath. Her eyes widened, but she didn't move away. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice husky, low. She swallowed hard, her lips parting slightly, but no words came. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between hesitation and desire, but she didn't pull away. Slowly, as if giving her time to refuse him, he tilted her chin up. His thumb grazed her jawline, sending a shiver down her spine. And then, with the slightest pressure, he leaned in. Their lips met in a kiss that was both fire and silk, gentle yet demanding. Callum felt something inside him unravel the moment he tasted her. Zariah melted against him, her fingers clutching the front of his shirt as if grounding herself. He deepened the kiss, his hand sliding to the small of her back, pulling her closer. The world around them disappeared. There was no past, no future, only this moment. Only the intoxicating warmth of her body pressed against his, the way her lips moved against his with perfect rhythm, as if they had been meant to find each other all along. When they finally pulled away, both breathless, Callum rested his forehead against her. He could still taste her on his lips, still feel the imprint of her body against his. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her fingers still gripping his shirt. "I know," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I don't care." Neither of them did, because for the first time in a long time, something felt undeniably right, and neither of them was willing to let it go. The air in Callum's office was thick with tension. Just when his life was beginning to make sense, just when Zariah had started to feel like more than a temporary guest in his world, his past came crashing back into him, like a storm he hadn't seen coming. Sienna Carr. She entered the office as if she owned it, her high heels clicking against the polished marble floor, her blonde curls cascading over her shoulders like golden waves. She wore a white designer dress that hugged her slender figure, her red lips curling into a knowing smirk as she laid her icy blue eyes on Callum. "Miss me, Callum?" she purred, dragging out his name like a slow melody, her fingers trailing across the edge of his desk. He stiffened. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since she left him for a man wealthier, older, and just as manipulative as she was. Sienna had always been a master at playing the game of wealth and power, and Callum had been her greatest conquest, until she decided he wasn't enough. And now here she was, sauntering back into his life as if nothing had happened. "Sienna," Callum said, his voice guarded. "What are you doing here?" She sighed dramatically, tilting her head, her fingers brushing against his arm as she leaned over his desk. "I made a mistake, Callum, leaving you. It was the worst decision of my life." He scoffed. "Is that so? I should have never walked away from what we had," she continued, her voice turning softer, more vulnerable. Yet Callum knew better. She was an expert at manipulation, always saying what she needed to get her way. But before he could respond, his eyes flicked toward the glass doors of his office, where Zariah stood, frozen. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had come to drop off some documents he had requested, but now she stood rooted to the spot, gripping the files so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her brown eyes, once warm and filled with admiration, were now shadowed with something else, something painful. Sienna noticed and turned, a slow, amused smirk forming on her lips. "Oh," she said, her tone dripping with feigned surprise. "So this is the little project I've heard about." Zariah's spine stiffened at the insult, but she said nothing, Callum's patience thinned. "Sienna, don't. I just didn't expect you to take charity work so seriously, Callum," she continued, as if Zariah wasn't even standing there. "How noble of you." "Sienna," Callum growled, his blue eyes darkening with warning. But Zariah had heard enough. She took a step back, then another. Callum could see the walls rising around her, the way her body tensed, the way she suddenly looked so small. He knew that look. It was the same guarded expression she had the night he found her in the rain. The expression of a woman who had been hurt too many times to trust anyone fully. He rose to his feet. Zariah. But she turned and walked away before he could reach her. Callum's heart clenched. Sienna let out a soft chuckle. Seems like your little pet doesn't take rejection well. A deadly silence filled the room. When Callum turned to face Sienna again, his expression was ice. Watch yourself, Sienna, he said, his voice low, dangerous. You have no idea what you just did. Sienna's smirk faltered for the briefest second before she flipped her hair over her shoulder. Oh, Callum, she said sweetly. You and I both know she's just a phase, a distraction. Callum clenched his fists. But outside the office, Zariah didn't hear the rest. She was already walking through the building, each step heavier than the last, her heart a tight knot in her chest. She had told herself she wouldn't fall for him, but she had, and now she was paying the price. That night, Callum assures Zariah that Sienna means nothing to him anymore. He cups her face, his blue eyes searching hers for trust. I swear to you, Zariah, she's my past, you're my future. Zariah wants to believe him. She truly does, but a lifetime of disappointments whispers warnings in her mind. She brushes the doubt away, holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Callum is different. The next evening, Callum attends a high-profile charity gala, an event swarming with media, celebrities and the elite. Zariah chooses to stay behind, not wanting to feel like an outsider in a world she doesn't belong to. She curls up on the couch with a book, reassuring herself that Callum will come home to her, proving his words true. Hours later, her phone buzzes. A news notification. She clicks it, and her heart plummets. A photo, no, multiple photos of Callum and Sienna flood the screen. Sienna, dressed in a dazzling red gown, leans into him, her manicured fingers possessively clutching his arm. In another, she whispers into his ear, her lips grazing his skin. The worst of them all. A shot of Callum, smiling almost intimate, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. Zariah's hands shake as she scrolls through the endless stream of betrayal. The man who had promised her that Sienna meant nothing now stood beside her, looking every bit like the powerful billionaire, and his perfect match. The walls close in, her chest tightens. Every part of her screams that this is exactly why she never let herself trust men like him. By the time Callum returns home, Zariah is sitting on the edge of the bed, her jaw clenched, her hands gripping the news articles printed out in front of her. He walks in, exhaustion on his face, loosening his tie. Zariah, did you enjoy being paraded around as her trophy? She cuts in, her voice like ice, though her eyes burn with barely contained pain. Callum frowns, stepping closer. It wasn't like that. Sienna cornered me. I couldn't just walk away without making a scene. She lets out a bitter laugh, tossing the papers at him. Oh, really? Because you seemed perfectly fine letting her touch you, whisper in your ear. You smiled at her, Callum. You held her. Callum's shoulders tense. Zariah, the media twist things. You have to believe me. Believe you. She takes a shaky breath, forcing herself to remain strong. I was a fool to think you'd ever choose someone like me over her. I won't be someone's second choice. I won't beg for what should be freely given. Callum steps forward, reaching for her, but she moves away, shaking her head. Tears threaten to spill, but she blinks them back. Don't, she whispers. Don't touch me. She turns, grabbing her bag from the closet, stuffing her few belongings inside. Callum's panic rises. Zariah, don't do this. Please. She pauses only for a moment, looking at him one last time. You already did. And with that, she walks out the door, leaving Callum standing there, his heart pounding, his world shattering. The moment she steps into the night, the cold air biting at her skin, she realizes something. This isn't just about Callum. This is about her. For the first time in years, she's choosing herself. Zariah stared at the empty walls of her tiny one-bedroom apartment, the dim light flickering above her. It was nothing like Callum's penthouse. The ceilings weren't high, the furniture wasn't draped in luxury, and there was no breathtaking skyline view. But it was hers, her space, her beginning. She refused to let heartbreak define her. With the little money she had saved while staying with Callum, she bought a second-hand sewing machine, a few bolts of fabric, and began working on designs late into the night. Her fingers trembled at first, but soon muscle memory took over. Stitch by stitch, she poured her pain, her strength, and her determination into every thread. A fashion line for underprivileged women. She had once stood in the same place these women were, on the streets, cold, forgotten, but not anymore. She would build something bigger than herself. Meanwhile, Callum was unraveling. The silence from Zariah was excruciating. He hadn't realized how much her presence had become a part of his life, until it was gone. The penthouse felt empty, no laughter echoing in the hallways, no scent of cinnamon and vanilla from her baking experiments, no warm voice teasing him about his rigid schedules. He tried everything to reach her, calls, messages, flowers, even showing up at the cafe near her apartment, but she ignored him. The message was clear. She was done being the woman who waited. Sienna, however, was thriving in his misery. "You really thought she'd last?" She smirked over a glass of wine, her red-painted nails tracing the rim. "Callum, darling, some people are meant for a world like ours, and some just aren't." Her voice, once seductive, now grated on him like nails on a chalkboard. He had been blind before, but now he saw her for who she really was. "You don't love me," he said coldly, setting his glass down. Sienna blinked, feigning offense. "Of course I do. You love control." The truth hung in the air, suffocating her smirk. "I was too stupid to see it before," he continued, standing up. "But not anymore." Callum didn't wait for a response. He left her behind the same way she had once left him. But would Zariah ever take him back? Would she even let him try? Callum stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored black suit. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed them. His mind was consumed by one thought: Zariah. It had been weeks since she left. Weeks since he last heard her laughter echoing through his home. Weeks since he had felt the warmth of her presence. And now, as he stared at his own reflection, he knew what he had to do. He had to win her back. Tonight was her big night. The launch of Zariah Munro Designs, a moment that should have been celebrated together. Instead, she was standing under the spotlight alone because he had broken her trust. With a deep breath, he grabbed his car keys and stepped out into the night. The event was held at an elite fashion venue, the kind that only the most successful designers had the privilege of using. As Callum stepped out of his car, he was met with flashing cameras and murmurs from the press. Why is Callum Hayes here? He ignored them, his eyes scanning the room for the woman who had consumed his every thought. The moment he stepped inside, his breath hitched. There she was, Zariah Munro, the woman he had let slip through his fingers, the woman who had once trusted him, only for him to shatter her heart. She stood at the center of the room, radiating confidence in a stunning emerald green gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Her dark curls cascaded over her shoulders, her deep brown eyes sparkling under the lights. She wasn't just beautiful, she was powerful. Callum felt an ache in his chest. This was the woman he had almost lost forever. As she turned, their eyes met. For a split second, everything around them disappeared. The crowd, the flashing lights, the music, none of it mattered. It was just them. But then, just as quickly as the moment came, it was gone. Zariah turned away, greeting a group of designers with a dazzling smile, as if he wasn't even there. But Callum wasn't leaving without speaking to her. After the show, Callum found Zariah backstage, thanking her staff and models. When she turned and saw him, her expression hardened. "Callum," she said coolly, "what are you doing here?" His heart pounded. "I needed to see you." She crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Why? Because you're lonely. He took a step closer. No, because I love you. Zariah let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. Love, she echoed. Callum, love isn't enough without trust. His throat tightened. I know I hurt you, he admitted, his voice raw. I should have fought for you when it mattered. I should have told Sienna to leave the moment she came back. But I was stupid, and he swallowed hard. I lost you. Her gaze flickered with something unreadable, but she didn't move. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, he said, stepping even closer. I don't care about anyone else. I just want you. But if I have to spend the rest of my life proving that to you, then I will. Silence. Zariah sighed. Callum. He held his breath, waiting, but she just shook her head. I don't know if I can trust you again. Her words shattered him, but he wasn't giving up. Not this time. Zariah had spent her life learning the hard way that trust was fragile, and love, no matter how passionate, was never enough on its own. Even as she watched Callum fight to prove himself, a part of her held back. She couldn't afford to let history repeat itself. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal, built something of her own, and for the first time she felt powerful in her own right. So when Callum stood before her, telling her that he had funded a shelter for homeless women under her name, she didn't know how to react. She stared at him, her brown eyes searching his blue ones, trying to decipher his motives. You think money fixes everything? She asked, her voice laced with both pain and challenge. No, Callum said firmly, but I know actions speak louder than words, and I know what you care about. I don't just want you back, Zariah. I want to show you that I understand, that I see you. She swallowed, emotions choking her throat. Callum, she started, then shook her head. It's not that simple. He took a hesitant step closer. Then, let me make it simple. I love you, and I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Zariah's fingers clenched at her sides. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but his persistence was breaking through the walls she had built around her heart. However, she needed more. She needed proof that he wasn't just making empty promises. You want to prove yourself? She asked, crossing her arms. Fine. But I'm not going to just fall back into your arms, Callum. If you truly care about this cause, then show me, not just with your money, but with your time, your effort. His lips curled into a small, determined smile. Tell me what I need to do. And so, the real test began. He showed up at the shelter the very next morning, rolling up his sleeves and immersing himself in the work. He spent hours painting walls, assembling beds, helping with paperwork, and speaking with the women who lived there. He heard their stories that mirrored Zariah's struggles, and he realized just how blind he had been to the suffering of people outside his wealthy bubble. Zariah watched from a distance, surprised by the genuine dedication in his actions. He wasn't just throwing money at the problem, he was showing up. Day after day, he worked alongside her, proving that his commitment wasn't fleeting. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, Zariah found herself sitting beside Callum on the back steps of the building. They were both exhausted, sweat glistening on their skin, but there was an undeniable sense of accomplishment between them. Why are you really doing this? She finally asked. Callum turned his head to look at her. Because I need you to believe in me again, he admitted. Because losing you made me realize I don't just want to be a better man. I need to be. She exhaled slowly, her walls cracking just a little more. And what if I never let you back in? He smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eye. Then I'll still keep doing this. Because it's not just about you anymore, Zariah. It's about everything you've taught me. Her heart clenched. For the first time, she saw not just the billionaire who had once taken her in, but a man who was truly fighting to be worthy of her. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust him again. 1 week turned into 2, then a month. Callum continued to dedicate himself to the shelter, and in doing so, he and Zariah grew close again. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the laughter that came so easily between them, it was all coming back. But Zariah needed one final moment of clarity before she could truly forgive him. That moment came when Sienna showed up. Striding into the shelter like she owned the place, Sienna took one look at Callum, then at Zariah, and scoffed. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I knew you'd come crawling back." Callum stood protectively beside Zariah. "I didn't come crawling back to anyone," he said coldly, "and I have nothing to say to you." Sienna's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No," Callum corrected, taking Zariah's hand in his. "Leaving you was the best decision I ever made." Zariah's breath caught as she looked up at him. In that moment, she knew this wasn't just a temporary effort to win her back. This was real. He had chosen her, and for the first time in forever, she allowed herself to choose him too. With a deep breath, she turned to Sienna, her voice strong and unwavering. "You can leave now. You don't belong here." Sienna's lips parted in shock, but there was nothing left to say. She had lost. With one final glare, she spun on her heel and left. As soon as she was gone, Callum turned to Zariah. "Does this mean—" She smiled, truly smiled, and laced her fingers through his. "You passed the test, Callum." His blue eyes filled with relief and happiness as he pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. This time, Zariah didn't hesitate. "I love you too." And with that, they sealed their new beginning with a kiss. One that was no longer built on uncertainty, but on trust, redemption, and a love that had survived the storm. The invitation arrived at Zariah's doorstep in the form of a handwritten letter, elegant and deliberate, just like Callum. It wasn't a desperate plea, nor a casual message. It was an invitation to something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Dinner. A simple word, yet it held weight, especially between two people whose hearts had been bruised by betrayal and hesitation. For days, she debated whether she should go. He had hurt her. Yes, but he had also tried to make amends. The shelter he funded in her name wasn't just a grand gesture. It was a testament to the fact that he had finally understood her pain, her struggles, and the depth of her emotions. That evening, she stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the silky fabric of the red gown she had chosen. It hugged her curves perfectly, cascading down to the floor in a soft, flowing motion. She applied a final stroke of her signature red lipstick, knowing how much it drove Callum crazy. The thought made her smirk, but she quickly pushed the warmth from her mind. She wasn't going there to fall into his arms, she was going for closure. Or so she told herself. As Zariah stepped into the candlelit restaurant, the hushed whispers of the diners faded into the background. Her gaze found Callum immediately, sitting at a private table by the window, overlooking the shimmering city skyline. The moment he saw her, he rose to his feet, and for a moment she saw something in his piercing blue eyes that made her stomach tighten. "You look breathtaking," he whispered as she approached, his voice laced with something raw and unfiltered. A slow smile played on her lips. "You always were good with words, Callum. Only when it comes to you." The waiter arrived, filling their glasses with a rich red wine, and they fell into conversation that felt strangely familiar, yet entirely different. He asked about her work, her ambitions, her dreams. For the first time she saw Callum as more than just the billionaire who had rescued her from the rain. He was trying, truly trying, to be the man she deserved. "Zariah," he said, after a moment, reaching across the table to take her hand. She could have pulled away, but she did. "I know words aren't enough, but I need you to understand. I was a fool. I let my past dictate my actions, and in doing so, I hurt the one person who saw me for more than my wealth and status. You." She swallowed, her chest tightening at the sincerity in his voice. "Callum, I was never looking for grand gestures. I just wanted honesty. I know, and I want to give you that. Not just today, not just tomorrow, but for as long as you'll let me." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft melody of the violin playing in the background. Then, slowly, she turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. His thumb brushed over her skin, sending a shiver up her spine, and when he stood, walking over to her, pulling her up gently from her seat, she didn't resist. The world around them faded. He cupped her face, his fingers tangling in her curls, and for a split second, he hesitated, giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't, and when their lips finally met, it was nothing like their first kiss. There was no uncertainty, no fear of the unknown. This time, it was passion, longing and love. Love that had survived betrayal, misunderstandings, and heartbreak. Love that refused to be extinguished. As they pulled away, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Zariah Munro," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." She smiled softly, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "I suppose I can give you one last chance," she whispered, her voice teasing yet filled with hope. And just like that, their love story began anew, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. Sienna Carter had never been one to accept defeat, especially not to a woman she deemed unworthy of Callum's love. Seething with rage, she devised one final desperate plan to ruin Zariah Munro and reclaim what she believed was hers. If she couldn't have Callum, then she would ensure that no one else did either. The next morning, headlines exploded across tabloids and social media. "Callum Hayes falls for a gold digger. The truth about his homeless lover." Articles circulated fabricated details about Zariah's past, painting her as a manipulative woman who had targeted Callum for his wealth. Photos of Zariah taken during her homeless days were plastered across every major news site, accompanied by cruel captions mocking her origins. Zariah woke up to a flurry of phone notifications and missed calls. Confused, she clicked on a link sent by a friend. As she read the slanderous lies, her stomach clenched. The words burned, twisting the truth into something ugly. Gold digger, social climber, manipulative opportunist. Zariah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the vicious comments. The world had turned against her overnight. Strangers who knew nothing about her struggles were spewing hate. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Meanwhile, Callum was in a meeting when his assistant barged into the room, panic evident on her face. "Sir, you need to see this." Frowning, he took the tablet from her hands, his blue eyes darkening as he skimmed through the slanderous articles. His grip on the device tightened, fury coursing through his veins. He had tolerated Sienna's antics before, but this was war. Without hesitation, Callum called a press conference. Hours later, he stood before the cameras, his sharp suit immaculate, his expression hard as steel. These accusations against Zariah Munro are nothing more than lies, fabricated by a bitter ex who refuses to accept reality. "Zariah did not ask for my money. In fact, she refused my help multiple times. She is a strong, independent woman who has built something incredible from the ground up. Anyone who dares question her integrity is questioning mine." His voice was laced with cold authority, daring anyone to challenge him. Across the city, Zariah watched the broadcast, her heart swelling. Callum had not just defended her, he had stood beside her, unafraid of the backlash. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She would not let this break her. Sienna, watching from her penthouse, screamed in frustration. Her plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning Callum against Zariah, she had cemented their bond. The world could think what it wanted. Zariah knew who she was, and more importantly, so did Callum. As the cameras flashed, Callum took one final stand. "Zariah Munro is the woman I love, and nothing, no rumor, no scandal, and certainly no ex will change that." The world listened, and for the first time, Zariah realized she was no longer fighting alone. The rooftop of Callum's penthouse was a breathtaking sight, lit by the soft glow of fairy lights, with the city skyline stretching endlessly beneath them. The evening air was crisp, yet comforting, the stars shimmering like scattered diamonds across the sky. Zariah stood near the edge, the gentle breeze caressing her skin, making her long curls dance. Wrapped in a stunning midnight blue gown that highlighted her elegance, she looked like she belonged among the stars. Callum had spent weeks preparing for this moment. He wanted everything to be perfect. A private chef had crafted a 5-course meal, a string quartet played in the background, and the rooftop had been transformed into a dreamlike paradise. But none of it mattered as much as the woman standing before him. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched her take in the beauty of the moment, unaware that tonight would change their lives forever. "Callum," Zariah whispered, turning to face him. "This is unbelievable." He took a slow step forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "Not as unbelievable as you, Zariah." She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "You always know what to say. I only speak the truth." He reached out, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her skin, relishing the warmth he had come to crave. "You deserve the world, and I intend to give it to you." A flicker of emotion crossed her face, something vulnerable yet hopeful. She had spent so long guarding her heart, fearing that love would leave her shattered again. But Callum had been patient, unwavering in his devotion, proving time and time again that he wasn't like the men of her past. "Dance with me," he murmured. She hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. He pulled her close, wrapping one arm securely around her waist as they swayed to the music. The night melted away as they moved in perfect harmony, their bodies pressed together, hearts beating in sync. As the final note of the song faded, Callum slowly pulled back. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Dropping to one knee, he opened it, revealing an exquisite diamond ring that caught the moonlight beautifully. Zariah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Callum," he took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've spent my entire life chasing success, thinking that money and power were the only things that mattered. But then you walked into my life and turned my world upside down. You showed me what true strength looks like. You taught me that love isn't about saving someone, it's about standing beside them through the good and the bad." Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill. "I don't want to be your savior, Zariah," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be your partner, your equal. I want to wake up beside you every morning, hold you when life gets tough, and celebrate every victory with you. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. Marry me." Zariah's breath hitched. For so long she had convinced herself that fairy tales didn't exist for women like her. But looking into Callum's eyes, she saw nothing but love, sincerity and devotion. No hesitation, no doubt, only certainty. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes." A slow, radiant smile spread across Callum's face before he slipped the ring onto her finger. The moment it settled in place, he stood and pulled her into his arms, capturing her lips in a kiss that held every promise he had just made. The city lights blurred around them, the world fading until there was nothing left but the two of them, wrapped in the magic of the moment. Zariah rested her forehead against his, her heart soaring. "I love you, Callum." His arms tightened around, "and I will love you for the rest of my life." As the stars bore witness to their love, the night carried their laughter, their whispers, and the promise of forever. The grand hall shimmered with golden lights, casting a warm glow over the elegantly adorned guests. The scent of fresh roses and jasmine filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of a romantic melody played by a live string quartet. Every detail had been meticulously planned, yet nothing in the opulence of the evening compared to the breathtaking vision about to walk down the aisle. Zariah stood at the entrance, her hands lightly trembling, not with fear but with the overwhelming weight of this moment. She had designed her wedding gown herself, a masterpiece of silk and lace that flowed like liquid moonlight. The intricate beadwork sparkled under the chandeliers, reflecting the strength and beauty she had always carried within. A tiara of diamonds nestled against her voluminous curls, and a sheer veil cascaded down her back like mist over the ocean. As the wedding march began, the doors parted, and all eyes turned to her. But she only saw one person, Callum. He stood at the altar, his sharp navy suit tailored to perfection, his blue eyes locked onto her with an intensity that stole her breath. He had always been handsome, but today he was more than that, he was hers. With each step down the aisle, memories flooded her mind. The stormy night he had found her shivering under a street lamp, The moments of laughter and whispered secrets, the painful betrayal and the fight for trust that had led them here. She had once feared being nothing more than a temporary fixture in his life, but now she knew without a doubt this love was permanent. As she reached the altar, Callum extended his hand. She placed hers in his, feeling the warmth and certainty in his grip. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The officiant began the ceremony, but in that moment, nothing else existed but the two of them. When it was time for the vows, Callum took a steadying breath and looked deep into Zariah's soul. "I once thought I had everything: wealth, power, control, but then you came into my life, and I realized I had nothing without you. You are my heart, my partner, my equal in every way. I vow to cherish you, support you, and love you with every breath I take." Tears shimmered in Zariah's eyes as she smiled through the overwhelming emotions washing over her. "I was lost when you found me, but you never tried to change me. You saw my strength when I doubted it myself. Callum, you are my home, my love, and my future. I vow to stand by your side, not as someone you saved, but as the woman who chooses you every day." A hush fell over the guests as the weight of their words settled in the air. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Callum wasted no time. Dipping her low, he captured her lips in a kiss that spoke of devotion, of passion, of a lifetime of love waiting ahead. The crowd erupted in cheers, the clinking of glasses and the soft flutter of rose petals filling the space around them. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, Zariah knew this was just the beginning. Their love had been tested by fire, but they had emerged stronger, unbreakable. Today, she wasn't just marrying a billionaire. She was marrying her best friend, her partner, her great love. The morning sun streamed through the grand windows of their newly built headquarters, casting a golden glow over the polished marble floors. Zariah stood in the heart of the building, the place where her dreams had finally materialized. A decade ago, she had been struggling to survive on the streets, but now she stood as the CEO of a globally renowned fashion empire, Monroe Luxe. Callum entered the room, watching her with pride. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just like you." She leaned into his embrace, taking a deep breath. "I still can't believe we did it, from a single collection to stores in Paris, Milan, New York, and Tokyo. It's surreal." Callum chuckled. "Believe it, my love. You worked for this. You fought for this. And you deserve every bit of success." Zariah turned to face him, her brown eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I wouldn't have done it without you. Your support, your belief in me, it made all the difference." He cupped her face gently. "You did the hard work, Zariah. I just made sure the world saw the brilliance I've known all along." Together, they walked into the conference room, where their executive team awaited them. A mixture of designers, strategists, and business moguls filled the space, all eager to hear the next phase of their expansion. Zariah took the lead, outlining their plans for an affordable luxury line aimed at helping underprivileged women look and feel their best. "Fashion isn't just about beauty," she declared. "It's about empowerment. I want Monroe Luxe to stand for something bigger than just luxury. I want every woman to know she is valuable, no matter where she comes from." Applause erupted in the room, and Callum watched her with admiration. She had turned her pain into purpose, and he couldn't be prouder. That evening, they celebrated their success at an intimate dinner. Over candlelight, Zariah reached for Callum's hand. "We built this together, but more than anything, I built a life with you. That means more than any business." Callum kissed her hand. "And I will spend my life making sure you know just how much you mean to me." With love, ambition, and a shared vision, they had not only created an empire but a legacy, one built on passion, resilience, and unbreakable love. The rooftop shimmered under the golden glow of the city lights, the cool breeze carrying the distant hum of life below. It was a breathtaking view, but Callum's eyes weren't on the skyline. His gaze was locked onto the woman standing in front of him. Zariah, the love of his life. The woman who had entered his world as a storm and left behind a legacy of strength, passion, and resilience. Dressed in a flowing ivory gown, her curls cascading down her back, she looked more radiant than ever. Her hands gently rested on her stomach, where the faintest curve hinted at the new life growing within her. A child. The thought alone sent a rush of overwhelming emotion through Callum's chest. He had spent years chasing wealth, power, and success, thinking those were the only things that mattered. But now, standing here with the woman who had changed his life forever, he realized this was the only thing that ever truly mattered. Zariah caught him staring and let out a soft laugh. "You're doing it again." Callum blinked, a smile pulling at his lips. Looking at me like I'm the only person in the world." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his, pressing them against his chest, where his heart beat steady and strong. "That's because you are, Zariah." She smiled, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Yes. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. That no matter how much someone claimed to care, they could still walk away. "But you proved me wrong." Callum swallowed hard. He had almost lost her once, and the thought of it still haunted him. "I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Zariah exhaled shakily, resting her forehead against his. "I don't need proof anymore, Callum. I know." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the loose strands of her hair, as Callum cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Do you remember the night I proposed?" She let out a soft laugh. "How could I forget? You were so nervous." "I was terrified," he admitted, "because for the first time in my life, I wanted something more than money, more than success. I wanted you, and I was afraid I didn't deserve you." Zariah tilted her head, her gaze soft. "And now," he smiled, "now I know I'm just lucky enough to stand by your side." Her breath hitched at the familiar words, the very ones she had once told him. A single tear escaped down her cheek, but Callum caught it with his lips, kissing the trail it left behind. "I love you, Zariah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered back, and when he kissed her, it was slow, deep, filled with the unbreakable bond they had forged through trials, heartache, and redemption. Zariah had once been a girl who had nothing, and Callum had once been a man who thought he had everything. But together, they had built a life neither of them could have ever dreamed of. As they stood beneath the endless sky, with their future waiting before them, they knew this love had not only survived, it had conquered, and it would last for a lifetime and beyond.